And as I said, we normally do our sessions are much more interactive. So I think from our side, we apologise because we are going to be kind of sharing a lot of information with you. There will be a session midway where we're going to have a Q&A. So it's an opportunity for you to ask some questions. We Shipra from the GLA, who'll be here representing the funder, will be joining us. But please do feel free to show your hand if you want to ask a question, or use the chat in order to any questions that you have, and we'll try and answer them as we go along. In terms of, we can move on to this next slide. In terms of the introductions, you've done that. In terms of the purpose of the session, let's just go to the purpose of the session first. There's two things we're going to cover today. One is sharing information about the fund, and it's round two of the Civil Society Roots. And in it, talking to you about the funding programme. We'll also be talking through about the application process and timeline. Yes, we'll be talking through those two things. We have, with the other grantees, agreed some ground rules in terms of how we always work together in these spaces. It's all common sense, hopefully, but it's just checking in with you that even though we've only got an hour, that we all kind of sign up to this approach. We're all here to respect and listen to each other. We don't have to agree with each other, but there's respect in the room. We can disagree respectfully. And that if there are, it's a safe space. So if there is information that people share, that we ask that outside of this space, if you do share that, you do that very generically and not specifically in terms of names and specifics. So talking you through in terms of the fund, just to kind of set the scene. This fund is Civil Society Roots 3 grants programme. It's about supporting people and organisations and partnerships. It's supporting equity-led groups, and we have a definition, the working definition that the GLA mean by equity-led groups that we will share with you. Primarily, this fund is not about delivering frontline services. It's about funding things that you do in order to support organisations that are equity-led, to build relationships and networks, to bring together people in order to amplify voices, in order to influence either people influencing themselves or through others, advocacy and self-advocacy, with a focus on building skills and capacity. It's very much about building the skills and capacity of equity-led organisations in order to strengthen the infrastructure, the community infrastructure in the areas that you work.
So the objectives of this grant fund. So Civil Society Roots, this is the third iteration of Civil Society Roots, and the objectives of the fund, as Paul has alluded to, are to support equity-led communities, to build more connection and stronger relationships, for those communities to work on having an amplified and shared, to support organisations who are affected by inequalities, build space for ideas and projects led by and delivered for and with equity-led communities, and to make sure there is, by the end of the programme, the objective is to make sure there's a stronger community-led sector in London. Next. The outcomes of the fund. So the fund is aiming to stronger communities, so stronger equity-led communities, supporting organisations and partnerships which are led for and by those equity-led communities, supporting Londoners to lead recovery within their own communities, Make sure unheard voices are heard, are listened to, are amplified. Support organisations to work together. Make sure communities are and feel valued. Enable communities to have power and control over local decisions, and create stronger connections across communities. The grants, the grants for this round, so round 2, are impact grants. Impact grants can be up to £30,000. They don't have to be £30,000, up to £30,000. And the money is to be spent in a period of up to 12 months. So the project doesn't have to be £30,000. It doesn't have to last for 12 months. It has to complete the aims and objectives that you've applied for and you've been granted funding for. In addition to the £30,000, there is an access grant that can be applied for to support organisations who may have access needs. So, for example, if you needed interpreters or easy read or captions to enable you to deliver the grant project, you can apply for up to £2,500 of access support. And as Paul has already said, there's an additional support offer, which is a range of skills workshops, networking opportunities within boroughs, pan-London networking opportunities that's available to all of the grantees. For the round 1 grantees, we've been delivering a programme of support, and this will continue and be developed to respond to the needs and aspirations of both round 1 and round 2 grantees.
So, what type of projects can the impact grants be used to do? So here's a kind of flavour of some of the sorts of projects that impact grants can qualify for the funding to do. So in the first round of funding, so this is the second round, in the first round, there were 2 levels of funding. One was a development grant, which was to develop something, as well as the impact grant. In this is impact grants. So there will be a number of potential applicants coming in from the first round development grants that have tested an idea. So they might, or you might have tested an idea in your locality, in your borough, around providing support to your community, which is a priority that they've identified. And you might be using this funding in order to implement that new way of support. Using the fund, applying to the fund to fund a post, which is in an area or a neighbourhood or a locality, which focuses on building relationships between organisations or between your community and organisations, or between your community and commissioners, or it might be about building a network or a voice in order to influence commissioning in the borough, or influence some level of decision making. You might already have a network in your borough that is needing a bit of development and maintenance and growth. So you could be applying for the funding to support that. You might be wanting to test something that's been tried in another borough or another part of the country or even another part of the world around support.
This person can't answer at the moment.
Thank you. So you might be wanting to test that model of support from another area. When it says trialled in the cold spot means one of the 10 boroughs that have been identified. It might also be that you're establishing some kind of hub and spoke model of support, and that with that model of support, you want to use this funding in order to strengthen that and grow that and build relationships. So it's very much about providing something that leads to an outcome, which is about strengthening your organisation as an equity-led organisation and the community which you're working with. Next slide, please. So in terms of organisations that can apply for the grant, you can see from there that there's quite a comprehensive list. We did have a question in one of the previous sessions of a potential applicant who's a community interest company limited by shares. Please note you can qualify for your community interest company limited by guarantee, not limited by shares. You can also apply if you're a constituted community group or a charity. And if you don't qualify as one of those organisations, you can partner with an organisation that is eligible, is another option for you.
So what is an equity-led organisation? To apply for this funding, the applicant must be part of an equity-led organisation. Equity-led means that your organisation is led for and by and delivers to marginalised communities. For Civil Society Roots 3, those communities are defined as Black, Asian and minority ethnic Londoners, deaf and disabled Londoners, LGBTQI Londoners, older Londoners and women. To be equity-led, at least 50% of your organisation's trustees and staff members must be people from the community that you serve or have lived experience of the issues that your organisation is dealing with. The timeline, do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
Okay, don't really mind. Okay, so there's two timelines that we're going to share. One is because there's two stages of the funding, and that's in all recognising that smaller equity-led groups are generally have capacity issues and challenges. So the idea is to have a first stage, which is an expression of interest, which is a simple process or relatively simple process with just a few questions. And if you get through that stage, you'll be then invited to make a more detailed application. So the bad news is that there's a tight timeline. It was announced on the 24th of April. The closing date is the 19th of May. There's this open session there on the 2nd of May. Following the 19th of May, the good news is there's only 3 questions on the expression of interest, and they are word limited. So that there's not a massive onerous on doing a detailed application by the 19th of May. What happens following the 19th of May is that the funders will shortlist the expressions of interest. And if you are successful in getting through that stage, you will be notified by the 2nd of June and invited to submit a fuller application. And you'll have, and we'll give the timeline for that, but you'll have most of June in order to work on that application.
So the application form, as Paul has said, it has 3 yes/no questions and then 3 questions which require you to provide a bit of a narrative. So the 3 yes/no questions are whether you have a turnover of £500,000 in 1 year, yes or no. Whether you are an equity-led organisation, yes or no. Whether you are based in or work in one of the 10 boroughs that this fund applies to, yes or no. For clarification, the boroughs that this fund applies to are Bromley, Enfield, Harrow, Havering, Hillingdon, Hounslow, Newham, Redbridge, Sutton and Wandsworth. The narrative questions are, please can you tell us how you meet the description of an equity-led organisation? You have up to 50 words to do that in. The second question of the 3 questions is, how will your project lead to stronger networks, capacity or voice? How will it support groups facing structural inequalities in your borough? And you have up to 200 words in which to answer that question. And the third question is, how are you in a good position to run this project? how are you the people that should be running this project? And you have up to 300 words in which to answer that question.
So our questions to you, but we didn't need to pose those to you because you were posing lots to us, were around really thinking about how you're using your work to apply for the impact grant and using kind of evidence of need, reflections and learning from your work to date to inform your project idea. So those were the questions that we would be inviting you to be thinking about, obviously not in this session now, but to be going away and having doing that thinking, because that will help you with your developing your project ideas if that still needs developing. But if we move on to the next slide.
So the timeline for the application process for people who are successful at the expression of interest stage, people will be notified by or on the 5th of June that they have been successful and invited to complete a full application. There will be open information sessions for everybody that has been successful. People will be invited to attend to look at and talk through the application process. The deadline for the full application process will be the 30th of June. So it will be open from, the full application process will be open from the 5th of June until the 30th of June. Then following the 30th of June, in July and August, the assessment teams grant panel teams will be going through the applications, assessing them, and people will be notified so that grants can go live from the 4th of September. That doesn't mean that grants have to go live on the 4th of September. The grants will be live from the 4th of September. The application form, so this is just to give people warning. If you're invited to submit full application form, you'll have to provide your organisation's bank details, your governance documents, which will need to include your dissolution or winding up clause, and a copy of your most recent audited accounts. And if you're a small organisation, a set of accounts that have been signed by an independent accountant. You'll have to provide a statement of your organisation's cash flow for the year, evidence of insurances, both public liability and employer's liability. And this speaks to the question earlier on from Kingston, sorry, I can't remember who asked it, but it was definitely about Kingston. If you are looking to work within one of the 10 boroughs, but you are not registered in that borough, you will need to provide 2 referees or references that the GLA team can verify that you work in those boroughs and you are a trusted organisation working with the equity-led group in those boroughs.
Okay, so I think somebody asked a question around what sorts of things are the funders looking for. We've just got a little kind of few slides on this, which hopefully might help you with your application. And generally, this is often what most funders are looking for. So the key thing that they're looking for is this golden thread that runs through your application. So need. Do you have clear evidence of need that you're trying to deal with or address? And when they talk about need, they're looking for some research that you might have done, or some consultation that you've done. When did you do it? How many people did you speak to? What were the priorities that they came back with? Is there any borough statistics within your borough around to support the need for the community that you're working with? Is there any London-wide statistics? The GLA has quite a lot of information that you can kind of draw on. So what is the evidence of need? Is it really clear in terms of that evidence of need, the issue that you're trying to address? And then once you've got your evidence of need, you're very clear. Just go back one second. Is it very clear in terms of your idea is really linked to addressing that need? it's very obvious, but often what funders will see in the application is there's a lot of need that's presented, but what's being proposed to address that need doesn't necessarily tie in tightly. So that needs to tie in tightly in terms of what you're trying to address really responds to and addresses that need. And also how what you're doing will lead to stronger support for the communities that you're working with. Because ultimately that's what this fund, that the funders want to see, is how what you're doing will lead to stronger support for the communities that you're supporting. The second thing that they are keen that will help them decide on the funding is around the objectives. So being really clear about how your project idea that responds to your need will meet the objectives of the fund. Now, you don't need to meet all the objectives. I don't think there's an expectation that your one project is going to meet all the objectives of the fund. Much better to very clearly show how what you're proposing, your project idea, really meets at least one of the key objectives. You don't get more points for more objectives, in as far as it's about depth as well, in terms of how it really addresses that key objective. And then also what they want to see is in that, so what you will do, how does it build networks? How does it build capacity of either your organisation as an equity-led organisation and the communities that you're working with? Or how does it make the voice amplified and stronger and being able to influence decision makers within your borough? And then the other key thing is around how you are making sure that the community that you're working with are not just passive recipients or beneficiaries of your project, that they are central to your project, that they're involved in shaping your project and running your project and delivering the project. And the third aspect is,
how are you going to make it happen? Do you clearly show the steps that you need to take, your project plan, what you're going to do, how you're going to make this idea happen? And does your budget clearly reflect what you're going to do and the resources you're going to need? Are the costs clear, and are the costs proportionate? So it's worth pointing out, just assuring people that this is a full cost recovery grant programme. So the project team will expect to see, for example, a proportion of insurances, a proportion of rental, a proportion of recruitment cost, well, all of the recruitment costs if you need to recruit somebody, a proportion of supervision costs. So it's the direct costs and then all of the other indirect costs that make the project successful. So are those things clear? What you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and the resources that you need to make it happen. Then lastly, what are the next steps? Put in your diary the 19th of May, because that is the deadline for the expression of interest. As Paul has already said, the link that we've attached there has the full prospectus for the funding programme. It also has a link, or go down the page, it has the details of the projects that have been funded to date. You want to look at the impact grants rather than the development grants, and hopefully that will be useful in getting an idea of the types of things that have been funded to date. And then lastly, I think, and then tomorrow or maybe the next day, these slides will be sent to you by the GLA team. And we would suggest that, and this I hope you will go with the GLA team, that you sign up for the community engagement newsletter that the GLA team send out quite frequently, which has a range of different initiatives and resources that might be interesting to you and the organisations that you work with. And then lastly, thank you for your time. I don't know if there's any other